later, but let's do an intro. We're going to be starting off with the blue lands anyway, so let's do a real intro. Hello, and welcome to Learning Legacy. Today, we're going to be covering Mono Blue. Now, I may have messed up the word covering, but that's okay, because the lands are here. Now, if you're going to play blue, it is best to mix, as I really suggest with any color for the most part in Legacy. The real joy, strategy, and power comes from mixing strategies, mixing colors, and things of that nature. So, you want to play blue. Actually, we're missing a land, oddly enough. Something I didn't put in here, for whatever reason, is Basic Island. I mean, I assume you know what Basic Island is. We should put it in there anyway. So, if you're playing blue, this is really what you're starting with. If you're playing blue, you're going to be using fetch lands and dual lands and basics. There are other lands like Darkslick Shores, Hinterland Harbor. There are shock lands if you're playing Death Shadow. I mean, you can run these in Legacy, but we're going to focus on the good stuff. As for blue mana, it's simple. Can't be wastelanded. Doesn't really need much of an explanation. But really, it's the other colors and sort of their position, what's the best, what's the most popular. So we won't be going over these in a particular order, but we will be looking at them. So, in my opinion, Underground Sea is probably the best one right now. You can cast Deathrite Shaman, Thoughtseize, Fatal Push, Gurmag Angler, Cabal Therapy, Hymn to Turok. Really, like, black-blue's quite strong. And you're normally going to play with 3 colors. Grixis Delver is one of the best decks. 4-color Control is one of the best decks. So this is really kind of one of the more popular and more used of the dual lands. But like we said, we're not going to do these in order. So next we're actually going to be doing Tundra. So Tundra, blue-white, typically blue-white control. You could run it in Stoneblade. Really, it's more blue-white control in Stoneblade than anything else, because blue-white's very slow. You could play it in a combo deck, obviously, but normally you'll see this specifically blue-white control decks. I guess we'll do Tropical Island next. Tropical Island is an interesting one because it can cast Deathrite Shaman, but you'll find that this is used, I won't say the most, but is probably one of the most splashed of the dual lands. For example, Grixis Delver, 1 Tropical Island. Why? Activate Deathrite Shaman. You also find other lists resolving things like Leovold. Sometimes people run this. Sometimes you'll see this as like a one of in Elves because they want to, be Elves. They want to have Leovold. I know, this is a terrible explanation. Let's actually get into it. You could run it for Leovold, number 1. Well, actually, it's really mainly for Leovold, the green that I've seen at least. From Elves, sometimes you see it in lists for things like Sylvan Library for like a blue-white control list. Maybe you're doing like a Miracles, although I actually haven't really seen Bant Miracles. And you also see this in Bant decks, but Bant decks don't really exist too much anymore. And of course, this is in things like Rug Delver, which is a very popular Delver deck. This is a very popular Delver land and tempo land, things like Infect, where you're running Daze, or Delver Sequence. When I say tempo with Infect, it's merely because it plays similarly to Grixis Delver. However, the strategies are very different. One is a combo deck, one is a tempo deck. But normally this is in tempo decks, I would say, or splashed for, just for the green. Today is Learning Legacy, so we're going to be discussing Legacy shit. Volcanic Island. I probably should have done this one early, but like I said, it's in no particular order. But Volcanic Island is kind of like the classic. You'll see this... you'll see it in Grixis Delver. You'll see it in Blue-Red Delver. You'll see it in Sneak and Show. You'll see it in Jeskai Control. You'll see it in 4-color Control. This actually may be the most popular of the dual lands, potentially. The most popular, potentially. But I like to call this one the classic, because Blue-Red really is the kind of classic control deck in my eyes. Not necessarily Blue-White, just because, like, when you get into Magic, you sort of like the idea of being able to control the game, burn your opponent out of the game. Things like Snapcaster Mage, which we'll get into. Pyroblast, which is going to be really in the red unit. I might have wanted to put that in the blue unit. Pyroblast counters any blue spell or destroys any blue permanent for 1 red mana. So if you're playing blue against blue, it's ridiculous. Pyroblast is 1 mana. It trades with anything that's blue. So it's great. Whether it's on the stack, on the field. But yeah, this is really just to give you an idea of the lands you want to run. So we will be getting to the fetch lands. The fetch lands sort of, we're only doing the blue ones here. You can use other fetch lands, like you could use, like Verdant Catacombs to get Tropical Island, because it gets any swamp, any forest. But here we're only doing the blue ones. This one, of course, blue-white, blue-green, red-blue, and black-blue. So to get a better understanding as to why you want to run the fetch lands, besides just getting good colors, because if you're playing a blue deck, you're playing 3 colors, you're playing 4 colors, maybe you're just playing 2. The fetch lands let you get any lands you want. You can get your basic island, you can get your dual land, but the real reason why you play so many fetch lands in Legacy actually doesn't have to really do with your mana basis. You're going to run a lot of fetch lands anyway, but one of the primary reasons we're actually going to get into in another section, which is the section following this one, which is cantrips. So let's go on up to that. Play some Revolt cards. I only think I play like 1 Revolt card. Cantrips. Oh, there we go. It's the first one. So, cantrips. We're gonna start off doing this in a non-particular order, then we're actually gonna work our way back around to Brainstorm. But Brainstorm is really why a lot of people run fetch lands, and why I think you should play a lot of fetch lands if you play Blue Lake. 8 or 9, really. Because with Brainstorm, you can draw 3 cards, put 2 back, and then with your fetch land, they shuffle your library. So, it really kind of lets you draw 3 brand new cards. For 1 mana, you're looking at 3 cards, and if you shuffle the 2 cards away with Brainstorm, it's kind of ridiculous because you're getting rid of the dead cards, replacing them with like good cards. So in reality, you are drawing 3 because those cards weren't really cards. So Brainstorm is ludicrously powerful with fetch lands. But we're going to work back to Brainstorm. It's number 1. We're going to start from number 5 actually, which I'm going to give to High Tide and Remora. Actually, I haven't really played High Tide much myself. So Thought Scour is the number 5. There are other cards that could be number 5, like an honorable mention. An honorable mention would be something like Portent, which is actually played in a deck in Legacy. It's played in Miracles. I considered putting it number 5, but Thought Scour has actually been played more in Legacy, because I mean, really when it came out, people were experimenting it in Rug Delver. But in Legacy, I'd really like to see this more in like Esper lists. It's very good in any kind of list where you can utilize things like Lingering Souls in the graveyard, or maybe if it's some kind of combo deck perhaps. But being able to put cards in your graveyard and gain value off those cards is why it's so good. It draws you a card, so it replaces itself. That's really what a cantrip is, a card that draws a card. Normally, they're referred to cantrips if they're 1 mana and they can replace themselves, not if you like draw 3 for 1 mana or draw 2 for 1 mana. It's really about, although Brainstorm, the irony of it drawing 3 cards, yet it's still considered a cantrip, but it does replace. You're not just drawing 3 cards, even though it can feel like that sometimes. Yeah, for that, I give Thought Scour the last, because if I was going to play Legacy, this would really be the last cantrip I would put in my deck. I would really cover the other 4, and the 4th place one, speaking of the order, is actually Preordain, which I think makes a lot of sense. The other cantrips are sort of just a lot stronger. It's actually really good in Goryo's deck. Yeah, that would make sense as well. Because the nice thing about this is that you're putting 2 cards in the graveyard, you're drawing a card. If you can gain value off those 2 cards, you can almost draw 3 cards in a way. If it's Lingering Soul, what if it's 2 copies of Lingering Souls and you draw a card? That's ridiculous. See what I'm getting at here? Card can be very good, but Thought Scour can also be... You don't get to pick the cards is really the issue. But Thought Scour, I think, is just extremely powerful. It's also instant speed. Instant speed's great. But back to Preordain. Sorcery speed, I would say this is like modern 1 point... Or this is like a hybrid, or a card that's really in between Modern and Legacy is what I'm trying to say. A lot of people argue that this card belongs in Modern, just because it's one of the weaker cantrips. Thought Scour is, of course, Modern Legal Gitaxian Probe used to be, but we'll get there. But, the thing about Preordain is, it is actually pretty good. It is sorcery speed, but you get to look at a maximum of 3 cards for 1 mana, which makes this a very good cantrip. You can scry both to the bottom, get your card. Those are your 3 cards. But the thing about Preordain is you'll normally see it in combo decks where you already have Brainstorm and you already have Ponder. You actually want another effect that looks at cards. You'll see this in things like Really, Sneak and Show and Storm are the decks that like to use the 4 Ponder, 4 Brainstorm, 2 Preordain. People don't usually do 4, but you can see lists that do have 4. You can still reorder with fetches, though. Well, yeah, you can actually even mill your fetches off, which is really sweet for this. Like, Thought Scour is good. It's very, very underrated for Legacy, because, like, it really doesn't see a lot of play, if any play. You really only see it in Brews. But Preordain, it's consistent, but it's definitely the weakest of the top 4. And I really consider these the 4 Legacy staples, while this is kind of like the awkward cousin who's like, hey guys, I'm still here, and I'm good, but no one plays me. Now, the reason why these are better is they're just a higher power level. So I'm actually going to do Ponder, maybe we'll do Gitaxian Probe third, and we'll do Ponder second, and we'll do Brainstorm first. Gitaxian Probe has a bad track record for being an extremely broken card because it doesn't have to cost mana. In the black unit, I kind of covered Phyrexian mana, but if you can draw a card for 0 mana, it does cost 2 life, but if you're winning the game, does that really matter? Whether you're, 20, 18 life, even like on the first turn of Gitaxian Probe, it's like, who gives a shit? Show me your hand. And you do get to look at your opponent's hand, so you get free information and card draw. So as you can imagine, it produces awkward situations because I can now play with perfect information while not being down on a resource whatsoever, and now I can make my first turn play knowing what you have in your hand. Very good card. However, you don't get to look at your own cards in terms of like the other cantrips. You can obviously look at your own hand, not really the greatest play, because it is look, not reveal. So if you look at yourself, like if you're playing multiplayer and use Gitaxian Probe, it doesn't show all the other players, if that ever comes up for you. But Gitaxian Probe is very good because it fills up your graveyard, it gets you free information like I was saying, it doesn't cost any mana most of the time. Using that information, you can just do so much things. You could pair this with Cabal Therapy, which is normally the most broken Gitaxian Probe. But yeah, card is just nuts. 0 mana draw card doesn't require much of an explanation as to why it's actually good. The reason why I think Ponder is better than Gitaxian Probe is Gitaxian Probe isn't really just a throw-in card most of the time in Legacy. In a lot of lists, you'll see that people will go to Ponder more consistently than something like Gitaxian Probe. Gitaxian Probe is normally for very aggressive lists, so it's like for combo decks and tempo decks, and maybe like even like Blue-Red Burn, if you consider that more aggressive and like less tempo. But it's still a Delver deck nonetheless, so like I like to put the tempo filter on it, even though that one's a little more aggressive. But it is very much so stop you just enough to put you to 0 to win the game. So the reason why I think Ponder is more powerful than Gitaxian Probe is because it is a 1-mana card that can potentially get you arguably 4 cards deep, because you do get to choose if you can keep those 3 cards. Unlike Preordain where you put them on the bottom, this, you'll just shuffle them away. You can completely reshape the game essentially for 1 mana. You're looking for a card, you don't need those cards, fantastic. With fetch lands, you can get 1 specific card, maybe you don't want all 3, you draw that 1 card, fetch your land. Ponder's great. Or maybe you say, fuck that, that's the situation where you get to look at a hypothetical 4 cards, because it could actually be one of the cards that you put back. So it's not necessarily 4 cards, you do get to look at 4 cards, but it's just very strong. Ponder is a ridiculously consistent card. It's really hard to go wrong with it, especially if you're playing control. Like some people run 2, some people run 1 in like the Deathblade lists. Things like Miracles, you probably run 4. Even in tempo decks like Delver, you run 4. Combo decks, you run 4. There's so many decks that run a 4 of Ponder, and there's a lot of decks that are like, well, yeah, I definitely mentioned I actually covered the Cabal Therapy and Gitaxian Probe interaction, more in the black section than the blue section. But don't worry, I definitely covered that. But yes, Ponder is great. In my opinion, the second best cantrip for that reason. It's consistent. People feel as though they can run 1 or 2, and it's still amazing. You draw it and it's great. Now, Brainstorm, we did cover Brainstorm a little bit in the beginning because we had to talk about the relation between fetch lands and shuffling away, getting to draw the 3, putting some cards back you don't like. I think it's kind of bad. Well, it is free info, but the idea of it being better in this situation is that the card is just played more. It's a more consistent card. I do understand your argument for why you do believe Probe is better, but But I believe that there will be more decks that will be playing something like Ponder than something like Gitaxian Probe. Gitaxian Probe does synergize much more with other things, but it's more of the kind of deck where it needs synergies to operate, where Ponder is just a card you could put in your deck. You're just like, I'll put in some Ponders. Whereas normally if you're playing Gitaxian Probe, you probably want something like Young Pyromancer. You probably want something like more like a Delver deck so you can utilize the information. Whereas if you're playing Miracles, you're playing like if you're playing a Brew, unless there's synergies with Gitaxian Probe, I don't think you would automatically throw it in for Legacy. Great card, but I think Ponder is much more of an automatic include for Legacy, which is why I put it in number 2. So we did cover the fetch land thing. Brainstorm, this card is kind of ridiculous. Even when you don't have that fetch land potential, when, let's say, you're playing against someone, right? They play a card that you can't beat. You have a Brainstorm in your hand. You now get to literally look at 3 more cards. You could find a counterspell. It gives you that instant speed, interaction that you really, really, really need. And, I mean, it just does everything. You can do combos with this, like things like Terminus, setting things up so if your opponent casts a discard spell, you can put a card on top of your library. Let's say your opponent's doing Gitaxian Probe, you're like, I don't actually want them to know about these particular cards. I'm actually going to put them on the top of my library. We did already mention fetching. Brainstorm's just ridiculous. It does so many things. Drawing 3 cards is really always going to be a ridiculously good ability. It's as simple as that. Brainstorm is just great. So let's see, we've covered cantrips, we've covered the lands. Let's get into it's a Flamin' Cheetos.